We're going to take a look now at creating our own DNS domains. We're going to be creating a DNS domain just for local. So rather than having example.com or pluralsight.com, we're going to be working with the DNS domain local. We need to edit our etc bind named.conf.local, and we add to it our zone. The zone represents our DNS domain. We're calling it, remember, just local, but this could equally be example.com. The type is primary, so it's a read-write copy, and then we've got the path through to our database file. The database file has all of the hard work in it. But we can check our configuration with named and checkconf. Once we're done with that, we can move ahead to creating the zone file, the actual database. We're going to have a subdirectory, etc bind and zones, to organize all of our zone databases together. We can then go through and edit our db.local. Just make sure we're referencing the same file that we put in the configuration for this zone. We've got a lot of detail to look at, but we can break it down. So we've got the default cache time to live, which we've got at 8 hours. So any records coming from this can be cached by local clients for 8 hours. We've got the start of authority record, and included in that, we've got the serial number. We're just using serial number 1. Every time we edit, we can increment the serial number. The refresh interval. So when we are using secondary servers, we can have them refresh every 8 hours looking for changes. If they fail to connect, they can try and reconnect every 4 hours until they successfully connect again. But after 1 week, they expire all of their entries if they haven't been able to synchronize within a week's period. For any client, we can specify a negative cache time to live. Here we're specifying 1 hour, and if you try and query an entry that doesn't exist, such as Ubuntu 3.local, then that negative response is kept for 1 hour, but after 1 hour, you can query again. We have our name server record, and here we're saying it's Ubuntu 2.local that looks after this. Don't forget the dot at the end of the domain name. Dot is really our root or top of our DNS tree. And then we have our host record, our address records for Ubuntu 1 and Ubuntu 2. Once we've created our zone file, we can check the zone file is okay using named and checkzone, the name of the zone, and the path to the database file. We can reload our configuration, and then we're able to test. So we should be able to ping Ubuntu 1 and Ubuntu 2, either with their full name or just their short name. Remember, it's our search domain that appends the local domain if we just use short names. We're also able to go through and look for other types of records, such as our name server record for the local DNS zone. If we're using short, we just get very short details coming back. But again, we're looking for the name server being Ubuntu 2. We're able to then go through and work at our command line, creating the DNS zone, the associated zone files, checking the zone, and reloading our DNS server. So this is where our real work begins, and we can go out to our Ubuntu 2 server and open up our text editor and move forward through to etc and bind, and then looking at the name.conf and .local. We can see that it doesn't have any zones in by default, but we can move to the end of the file and add in our own zone. So this is just specifying which zones we look after. So we use the zone keyword. We're putting in local, and that goes in quotes. But remember, this could be longer, so example.com or pluralsight.com, whichever zone we're looking after. We're specifying we're looking after the local zone. It's of type primary. Remember, each entry has a semicolon at the end. We need to specify the file so we know where the database file is located. And this is going to be /etc/bind /zones. So we're creating a subdirectory called zones to organize all of our databases, and we're just calling it db.local. db for database.local because that's the zone that we are looking after. Semicolon, and then we can close everything off by closing our brace bracket and a semicolon. That looks good. Save it. Don't forget to go through and check it. So sudo and named -checkconf. And then I'm just going to use escape and dot to bring up the last configuration file. But I could change it to named.conf, which remember is going to check everything. But that's enough. That's all that we've edited. Now, creating the zone file, we're organizing them in a central directory. So we're going to create the directory, mukdir /etc/bind/zones. Now we have to create the zone file, and that's, if you like, a little bit more difficult. Now, we could look inside of our etc and bind directory, and there are sample files that we can use. We can go through and list those, so ls/etc/bind, and we can see existing databases, so db.empty or db.local could be used. Their db.local represents our local hosts rather than our local domain. But if you don't want to create these files yourselves, you're also able to clone the Git repository for this course. So we can go through and use git clone. And then we can go through, I'm just going to paste it in, but github.com, the Urban Penguin, and LFCS. If we hit the big enter key on this, we'll copy across the information from Git to the LFCS directory. And if I go into then the LFCS, and then we're in our services course, and we're looking at DNS. When I move into that directory and then take a look at what we've got here, we've actually got our own complete db.local file. So any of the hard work you can actually use from these files, but I would recommend getting used to editing your own files as well. Let's move these across to etc and bind and zones. So we're making sure that we've got the correct path that we referenced from our configuration file. And if we take a look at the file that we have created, so sudo and vim, escape and dot to bring up our last argument, and then just put in db.local. And then you should be able to see that we've got a very similar file to we saw in the slides. So we've got our time to live, so our default cache period, our start of authority record that includes all of our serial number, the refresh interval for slave servers, the retry interval if they're unable to communicate, the expire if they can't communicate within a certain amount of time, and then our negative cache TTL of 1 hour. So if we have a response for an item that doesn't exist, we cache that for an hour. We have our name server record, and then we have our 2 host records for Ubuntu 1 and Ubuntu 2. Again, make sure you've got the correct IP addresses for your systems, but then we're able to go through and save this file. So let me just go through and save it. We can always go through and run our check zone. So with this, it's going to be sudo and named -check zone. The name of the zone, so in our case, that's going to be local. And then we can go through and take a look at the file. So escape and dot, we'll put the file name in. Now, saying there should be a clear line at the end of line 11, which there isn't, well, we can add a new line into the file. If we go through and use sudo and vim, and then put our line number, so +11, we will open up at line 11. And then we can just insert a new line, so lowercase o, and then go through and save our file. If we go back now and check again, that's all good to go. We can reload our configuration. So sudo rndc and reload. So that rereads the configuration. And now we're going to be able to see that I can ping Ubuntu 1 I can do a Control-C on this. But as well as using the ping command, we can use the dig command to look for different types of records. We can dig local dot and then a name server record for the domain local dot. Again, it's important to see that we are getting an answer, but we can see then the name service for this is Ubuntu 2. We can move across to Ubuntu 1 and check everything is working from Ubuntu 1. So this is our client. We don't need to restart any services now. It should just be working. So we can ping Ubuntu 2. So now we've got a centralized DNS server and we're hosting our own DNS zone.